The provocatoring of movements and engineering of revolutions is as old as time. This video will be an outside perspective on what has taken place recently in Berkeley and Charlottesville, but really it'll be much deeper than just that. When you do as much research as I and other independent researchers do, you can clearly see that one of the biggest problems we face is that those on the left have been brainwashed by repetitious mainstream media talking points to believe in preconceived notions on those they believe to be their enemies. They have bought the official Carnegie and mainstream media version of history, full of purposeful misinformation placed there to get Americans to think identity politics and the expansion of state power is their purpose in life. It's ironic that many of them are aware of and detest corporate influence, yet they blindly trust the corporation most prominent in American society, which is the mainstream media outlets and their 6 interconnected corporate owners. People on both the left and the right need to realize that they exist with the sole purpose of making the masses believe half-truths and manipulative dialogues, which are used to engineer society in a direction which only serves the international banking and corporate interests such as the Rothschilds, Rockefellers, and their royal relatives, who are truly the big movers and shakers behind the scenes of global politics. They're the ones who control those like George Soros. George Soros isn't really his own man. He's really just a higher-ranking puppet. It's no coincidence that presidential administrations are continuously filled with Council on Foreign Relations members and Ivy League fraternal order henchmen. This also includes the mainstream media's talking heads such as Anderson Cooper, who's a CIA asset, among others. Today, the left, who wraps itself in the emotional rhetoric of identity politics and share or steal the wealth economics, has been engineered to have the disposition of moral authority, as they've been droned upon with the narrative that Trump supporters are racist and those on the right are racists, and essentially anyone who speaks of or believes in individual liberty, local self-determination, the freedom of speech, or the right to self-defense is a racist bigot. They have become the political wind-up dolls and useful idiots of the international elite and their mainstream media. I'm by no means a Trump supporter, especially as he advances most of the same globalist policies that Bush and Obama did, proving that he is just another puppet. But these are insanely fallacious narratives that can only be believed if one buys into and has only learned our propagandized and revisionist version of history. This false awareness is where all the political aggression and violence at these events has been emanating from. We're witnessing a carefully crafted synergy between Carnegie, Rockefeller, and Ford Foundation influenced federal education via their control of history and their control of the mainstream media, which is working to divide the U.S. in order to keep us all from uniting to regain our individual liberty, our privacy, and our right to self-determination, which is our control over our local communities and state governments. All of us have been purposely misinformed of our reality. We've been miseducated on the cause and effect of certain mandatory policies. The social engineering we're seeing play out on the political stage is a product of the purposeful exclusion of important historical facts from our education system, such as the fact that all races and peoples have been systematically enslaved by governments at one time or another. There was never a mention of the brutality or the longevity of the Islamic slave trade when I was in school. Readily available facts are conveniently ignored into erasure, such as the Irish being some of the first slaves of America, who were made obsolete by what the royalty believed to be the superior slave workers and the Africans, a group of people who were sold by their leaders, those who were their rulers, those who claimed supreme ownership of them before their white slave owners ever did. They were the real enablers of African slavery, along with the British royalty, not the average commoner who settled in the United States. Other important facts that are conveniently left out are the estimated 1 to 3% of the southern population that actually owned slaves, which is quite a small number. And having knowledge of this makes it even more apparent that blaming an entire race for the actions of other individuals they had zero connection with back nearly 200 years ago is utter insanity. Did you know that the U.S. had its first black representative in New Hampshire all the way back in 1768, named Wentworth Cheswell, a man who went on to be a leader in the War for Independence? I was not aware of his existence until I did my own research. Never learned about him in school. In 12 years I was in public school. They purposely exclude the influence that blacks like this man had in the North during the Revolutionary War and long before the abolition of slavery. The reality for those who identify with Antifa and Black Lives Matter is that the right side of the political spectrum is not synonymous with racism, nor are white supremacists synonymous with the right, nor are all white people responsible for the disgusting actions of individuals with lighter skin tone in the present or the past. We're all individuals who are individually accountable for our own actions upon our own conscience. The masses must learn that in a political ideology, the neo-Nazis witnessed at Charlottesville, or historically, Nazis are quite similar to the Antifa left. The neo-Nazis and KKK are racists who support big government totalitarian policies that are found in socialist or communist nations. That is leftism with racist leanings. And that's if these protesters were even legitimate at all, and not just big groups of paid agitators that disrupt the peaceful gatherings, as recent evidence would assert. Really, everybody should know that Antifa and Black Lives Matter are funded by George Soros, along with the Ford Foundation, among other globalist donors. And it must be noted that the Ford Foundation has been exposed as a front group for secret CIA and international intelligence operations. We must also not forget the admitted plan of paying the mentally disabled to disrupt peaceful rallies and protests across the nation back during last year's campaign cycle. This is all connected, and it has been for decades. Charlottesville, Berkeley, and all of the other polarizing displays of the left versus the right, or the racists versus the moral superiors, all those polarizing displays of aggression has been engineered, while some well-meaning individuals have gotten sucked into the circus of delusion. Infuriatingly, the disgusting violence and agitation is almost always committed by the left, by Antifa provocateurs time and time again, yet blamed on peaceful gatherers. Last year it was exposed that these paid agitators are given bonuses if they're witnessed being especially confrontational and obnoxious. Yet despite this, the media points the finger at the right, who most of the time are gathered there peacefully, just supporting freedom of speech or supporting their candidate, who, in regards to last year, would have been Donald Trump. Either way, both sides are being engineered to be distracted into infighting with each other. While the nation was all up in arms over the KKK presence in Charlottesville, my first thought was that it had to be just as controlled as the Antifa gatherers. I mean, there were actually supposed witnesses that saw both Antifa and KKK protesters bust in together on the same buses spouses lined up back to back. I'll actually put the video that details that in the description. Regardless of that being true or not, the Charlottesville KKK presence was most definitely provocateur, as the CIA and FBI infiltrated and co-opted the white supremacist movement as part of the COINTEL program in the 1960s, and it's been proven that Antifa is not grassroots at all, as I alluded to. All I could think of when seeing the media coverage on the fiasco is that it looked like a scene out of a terrible race propaganda film. At this point, I don't even know how people look at these scenarios and actually think they're real. People don't act like that in the real world, you know? It's not 1948 anymore. Race relations are much better than people make them out to be. Race relations are much better than the media makes them out to be. And that's just not what a natural gathering looks like. That was so staged. It's just obvious looking at it. Without even doing any of the research, you could tell it was staged. If you do the research, you could tell that it was totally staged. I mean, if you do the background research, like I'm outlining here a little bit, you could tell that it was blatantly staged. Anyway, I digress. While plenty of people are stating that we're heading towards Civil War 2.0, too many aren't privy to the knowledge that even our Civil War was engineered by key industrialists and banksters such as Rothschild relatives, August Belmont, and their relatives at Erlanger and Company. These protests are obviously political theater meant to enrage and confuse the masses internationally. It's meant to keep our heads looking down instead of up. It's meant to keep us from rationally analyzing our existence, doing independent research away from majorly funded sources, and piecing together the big picture. The reality is that we're witnessing a century of corporate government programming at its finest. We see people infighting over mindless identity politics, over myths like the white privilege, bullcrap narrative, while chemtrails are sprayed overhead, modifying our weather, covering our skies, poisoning our atmosphere. They increase Wi-Fi, 5G, technology, conductivity, and ultimately establish, and basically what that does is help establish the cloud/Internet of Things smart grid, which will be almost impossible to avoid. A little bit of background on it. Basically, what all those particulates of aluminum and lead and barium do is they make those kinds of electromagnetic signals or frequencies more conductive, more easily harnessed. So what it does is, like I said, it helps establish the cloud, the internet of everything throughout our atmosphere, almost like a it's like a synthetic form of consciousness or cosmic energy. But we have these people infighting based in mindless identity politics. Like I said, we have chemtrails being sprayed. We have Congress passing a bill to allow warrantless searches of homes, and Trump signs it into law. Trump, the man who is sold to us as a sleeper libertarian who likes the ideas of Ron Paul. Yeah, that's very much something that's a libertarian, that's very constitutionalist. We have the scientific establishment involved at DARPA and the CIA front group known as Google are working on technology that will erase our cognitive privacy and liberty. we have the majority of us predominantly eating soft-kill, genetically modified food with proven negative side effects that corrupt regulators continuously pass off as harmless to us and our ecosystem. And who also attempted to suppress knowledge of their terminal health consequences. This is all despite decades of contrary independent studies and research, which they downplay and suppress. Yet we have people fighting each other over a man with a false persona and a false media narrative that's associated with him. While we all live in an electromagnetic frequency saturated environment, which has been proven to interfere with our central nervous system, which negatively impacts and disrupts the gut-brain connection, which fosters the brain-mind connection, thus chemically overriding our connection to our higher selves, our consciousness, our minds, our eternal all-knowing souls, by detoxifying the seat of our soul known as the pineal gland, which is a big part of the endocrine system. Right now we have the FCC, Wi-Fi service providers, the educational establishment, and 2 presidential administrations, as well as telecommunications conglomerates, pushing for 5G wireless systems and smart meters, which many independent researchers and scientists are sounding the alarm bells on when it comes to human mental and physical health, as well as the ability to have our inalienable right to cognitive privacy, the right to be left alone in at least our own minds. Yet, people are fighting over whether or not we should force every business and school in the nation to provide special bathrooms for 0.03% of the population, or whether or not we should blame all white people for the actions of very few individuals, or whether we should erase important aspects of our history that we can learn from, or whether white people should pay reparations for their white privilege, which doesn't exist. Because you know what? When I was a kid and my parents kept getting foreclosure notices from their mortgage company every month while they were paying the mortgage every month, which ended up being part of a pretty huge national lawsuit against that mortgage company, because they were doing that to people throughout the nation, and that wasn't based off of race. Because if it was, and if white privilege was a thing, then being white would have excluded us from that, and we almost lost our house in that process. We're lucky enough that people helped us out on both sides of the family and kept us from losing our home. And if white privilege was true, if that theory was true, then I'd have to say that white people wouldn't be surveilled by the state. Wouldn't white people be exempt from that harassment? Because the surveillance state doesn't know race. The surveillance state and the feeding of all that data into their analytic systems doesn't know race. It's not racist. I mean, everything that's feeding into what's going to feed AI, the whole smart grid, that's not racist. White people aren't exempt from that. I've been harassed by police. Plenty of white people I know have been harassed and profiled by police. And as I just said, we're all profiled by the state as a whole through the surveillance state. That's profiling. All this ground level crap with the militarization of police isn't really racist. I mean, you might have some racist police officers. There's predominantly black areas where black people are therefore the predominant target forced by the state through police. But the militarization of police in itself is not racist, nor are all nor are any of those policies racist. They're tyrannical against everybody. White people aren't exempt from the police state. We're just as affected by it. As I said, in predominantly black areas, black people are more affected by it than white people because it's a predominantly black area. But I digress. Both the left and the right, or I should say both the left and the alt-right, need to get a realistic perspective on our current and recent presidents. The truth is that when it comes to action and policy, they're pursuing the same agenda as puppets. Sure, there's some slight yet insignificant positives in regards to Trump. Trump has made a couple of good decisions, like killing TPP. Decisions that Hillary or Obama or Bernie probably would not have made. And he uses some different rhetoric as well that is more nationalist, which I guess in a way is better. But people forget that blind nationalism is easily steered towards a centralized globalist agenda. Just like at 9/11, there was never more nationalism than after 9/11 or Pearl Harbor, right? And what did that do? That was hijacked. We didn't get more liberty, did we? No, we didn't. We didn't get more peace, did we? We didn't get less of a police state. Like, as I said, we didn't get more liberty. We got less liberty. We got more centralization of power, more intervention into other nations' business. Into the business of other nations. So, this whole Trump has to be good because he's a nationalist narrative is really utter bull. The reality is that Trump and his administration lacks the respect for individual liberty and the respect for other nations' moral right to self-determination and to govern themselves. For a man who spoke of borders and walls, he doesn't respect boundaries through diplomacy, just like Obama and Bush didn't. He's expanding their wars, which only advances the agenda for a centralized communist global government, or I should say a centralized technocratic communist global government. As we make these nations that we invade in the Middle East puppet states that will follow the agenda of the New World Order elitists. The same old royalty, the same old group since probably ancient Mesopotamia. Definitely, it's provable that it goes at least the same line that's been holding the main positions of power throughout the world since directly ancient Rome. You can prove that. And I'm pretty sure there's even evidence of ancient Egypt. So you'd have to think that it goes back to ancient Mesopotamia. It just isn't documented or recorded enough. That I know of, at least, in my research. But I'm sure it's there if you search for hard enough. See, Trump never takes the action to persuade Congress or the Senate or state governments to respect liberty or stop intervening in the lives of the people or lower taxes or reduce regulations, because on the state and local levels where all that'll really be accomplished in a sustainable way. He won't even support getting the government out of healthcare, which was one of his main campaign promises, which is really the only way that healthcare or medical costs could go down. He's expanding a foreign policy that will only undermine liberty, expands biometric scanning in airports, and he has the belief that 5G, smart grid, Internet of Things technocracy sounds like a great idea, because he's been told that it will somehow maximize growth by allowing 10 to 100 times faster downloading. How about just freeing up the markets for the individual and not only corporations? Trump makes Trump takes no major steps towards backing or trumpeting bills to audit the Fed. He never speaks of abolishing the IRS. The IRS just hired 212 employees that were fired for theft and fraud. He has no intention of ending the surveillance state. He thinks it's a great idea and only seeks to expand it by passing those bills into law, or that bill into law that allows warrantless searches of homes. He just expanded the militarization of police, just like Reagan, just like both Bush presidents, just like Clinton, and just like Obama did. Especially during Obama's first term, he really expanded the militarization of police. And Trump speaks of no priority or indicates no priority of ending the CIA, the NSA, the FBI, the EPA, the Department of Education or Agriculture, or the Department of Energy, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, FDA, Bureau of Land Management. He has no indication of ending any of those tentacles of the global elite into our government. He's flip-flopped into supporting the globalist alliance of NATO. He has people in his administration that have ties to Goldman Sachs or Israel Firsters, and Trump himself was bailed out by the Rothschilds in the 80s, and their minion Wilbur Ross, who was part of the deal, is Trump's Secretary of Commerce. And you really think he's going to drain the swamp? You really think Trump's anti-establishment? I was a little optimistic about him, but he's proven thus far that he's just more of the same. And I don't know how people can't see that, especially people who watch InfoWars, and people have always been really critical of Alex Jones. But up until sometime in 2016, 2015, InfoWars still put a lot of truth out there, enough to learn, enough to inform people that they should know that Trump is not anti-establishment and that he's more the same, as I've outlined. As I just said, he's not going to drain the swamp because he won't drain where the deep state and their minions dwell, which is in the bureaucratic agencies and in the intelligence agencies. Getting rid of the bureaucracy and returning that power to the states and preferably to local communities gets rid of unelected, unaccountable policing and passing of regulations and laws that primarily seek to destroy liberty and destroy economic opportunity for all. It's the empowering of the individual that we should all be uniting for. That's what we should be rallying for in unity. Empowering the individual, not your special group or your skin color group. Group rights are phony government granted privileges. How do people not understand that? We just need full equality under a law that respects individual liberty, like our Bill of Rights. We need an end to the police state and an end to the militarization of police. An end to burdensome laws and regulations. An end to higher taxes on anyone, rich, middle class, or poor. We need to get rid of the income tax and the power that the private Federal Reserve has over the economy. We need to allow the individual to flourish and become more self-sufficient. That will lead to more voluntary charity like we had in the past. That is what used to truly help the downtrodden, and not a corrupt welfare system that gives you just enough to keep you dependent on government and keeps people ensnared in their clutches. Not an entitlement system that only harms the ability for the individual to take control over their lives. This is what brings about equality under the law and economic opportunity for all ages and all races, for all individuals. Because what is good for the individual is good for the group, unless that group seeks to have power over the individual. The leaders of Antifa and Black Lives Matter or any of these identity politics groups seek to undermine the ability for the individual to have control over their lives, and they believe in economic policies that will only limit the opportunity for all individuals to live a better life through better job opportunities. Sorry, I needed water. I've noticed that too many people have a sense of detachment from themselves and the businessman. We're all capable of being business owners, yet it is regulation and taxation, as well as inflationary money printing, that keeps many more from being able to be their own business owner. Most of our local towns are saturated in franchises and big corporations. Most of our local towns are saturated in franchises and big corporate chains. America is turning into one gigantic big cookie cutter shopping mall with no local cultures in your average town. I don't know why anybody would want that. That is what high taxes and rigid regulations produce. If you just take a look at the not so distant past, local businesses were plentiful and competed with the corporations. And it was these corporations that had the government institute regulations with the air of benevolence that led to the closing of small businesses. Now you see bumper stickers that say support local, but too many support politicians that destroy the possibility for more local business. And I don't get how people don't correlate such basic logic when it comes to economic policy. The Obama administration effectively fermented a narrow division on the political stage. This is all part of the plan by those who funded the Obama administration and had their minions become a part of his cabinet. They are now fully utilizing this social engineering campaign that took place throughout the Obama administration. We witness it upon the Trump administration in order to increase tension and easily trigger anger, although hardly anything has changed between the two presidencies, as I stated. I just don't understand how people can't see this on both sides. See, during the George W. Bush years, the country was probably never more united in their dissatisfaction with the presidency or a single politician. There was a strong and peaceful anti-war movement against our illegitimate intervention in the Middle East. There was the exposure of disgusting torture and numerous lies that engineered American support for the invasions. Yet now people support the wars when their favorite personality is in office, whether that's Trump or Obama. The anti-war movement is essentially dead. And I would say that was another part of getting Obama in office, or part of the agenda of getting Obama in office. Just like I would say a part of the agenda of getting Trump in office was to disorganize the liberty movement. Because now you have half of what would have been people that are part of the liberty or truth movement, I guess you would say. You have half of them that support Trump almost blindly, or have too much faith in him. And then you have the other half, like me, who see that he is just another puppet, just like Bush or Obama. And he's, still backing and expanding most of the same policies. But I digress. Bush's lies were consistently being exposed during this time, and his corruption was so blatant to the many. Although the mainstream media facetiously illustrated this as stupidity and not the deliberate lying to the American people to hide the true agenda. But either way, it still equaled Americans being aggravated and disgusted in regards to the condition of our nation. Then the elites rolled out Obama, and with it came the increase of mass hypnosis and worship of his false persona, which was facilitated through false media narratives and misleading rhetoric. And then with this came the easily engineered escalation of identity politics. And now, the race card could be played continuously and brought out where it never applied. While in all reality, Obama continued most of George W. Bush's policies, whether it be foreign or domestic. Whether it be the surveillance state, the militarization of police, the legalization of propaganda, the push to erode the right to self-defense, the laws which were passed to hold people indefinitely, and all that, never repealed by Obama, even though he spoke out against just about all of that in his 2008 campaign. And what we got from that escalation in identity politics is that whenever the right or the conspiracy theorists criticized his decision making or his slick rhetoric, his doublespeak, his constant lying, all they had to do was label people racist in an instant attempt to discredit us without any kind of discussion on policy. And Obama rhetorically fueled this in a coordinated effort between his administration and the media. This helped program the masses that anyone who speaks of the founders, the Constitution, limited government, or individual liberty into thinking they were just racists hiding behind propaganda, and that these people shall not be tolerated. Fast forward 9 years after the militarization of police by the Obama administration, which led to the polarizing scenarios where certain cops killed or shot certain people with darker skin, and here we are in Charlottesville and more recently Berkeley. But hey, let's not rationally look at the policies or how they've affected every single individual, including minorities, if you want to look at everything in terms of group, like a racist. And hey, don't you dare mention that white people have suffered through this time period just as much as minorities, after an economic collapse where millions lost their jobs and houses to foreclosure and their lives were systematically destroyed. Once again, no white privilege there. During the economic collapse of 2008, it didn't know skin color, and it was done systematically. And all the American people had their taxpayer dollars and their currency devalued by the banking bailout. By the bailout. But yeah, you can't contemplate any of that, because if you did, then you might piece together the bigger picture. Don't look at those crazy conspiracy theorists who are almost continuously proven right, who are trying to make you see your corporate overlords, steering us all towards a dependence on their governments, steering us towards a self-depopulation agenda. This is our common enemy, which knows no racial discrimination. The sad reality is that Americans are lost, and many of us have lost our principles or never had any to begin with. Americans have engaged in not just divisive identity politics that kill the individual, but are engaged in tribalism. I think many Americans are lost to a point where they don't even have a true identity on themselves. They don't even know who they are as individuals. They have no direction or path which they've chosen. And way too many never take the time to rationally analyze themselves and become conscious. Many have blindly bought into this presented choice between the red and the blue team based off of false rhetoric that attempts to present itself as political action. And this is majorly added to the shaping of our reality. The engineering of society described above is creating a nation of narcissists who claim empathy and moral superiority, yet most have lost their empathy or are lacking in the full ability to rationalize. Too many are engaging in this phony alt-left movement, just to stroke their false ego or feel like they're a part of something. And of course, most people are associating themselves with this due to years of social engineering through the public education system and mainstream media, as well as popular culture. So I understand that it's not entirely their fault, but at some point, it's like I said, like people just are not rationally analyzing themselves, and they have this false ego which keeps them from looking beyond the reality with which they're presented with, and they just haven't figured it out yet. It's sad that at this point, mainstream Americans somewhat understand corporate influence in government, but fail to see the scope of how virtually nothing changes between each president. And Americans will actually downplay its significance in steering society as a whole in numerous ways. They especially downplay its significance when it suits their blue or red team ideology. Sure, they hear about corporate influence involving the bailouts, and they'll pay attention when those that they believe are their opposition get campaign contributions from certain corporations. But too many fail to see how both sides are funded by the same interconnected group of people, connecting in both relations and political goals. If they understood this, then the left wouldn't be so easily trained to call everyone who doesn't agree with them a racist. These people who are getting involved in what's now being termed the alt-left or Antifa, which is essentially the socialist totalitarian movement, are killing their own consciousness by doing so, because they fail to see that government can and has been used as a bat or a force to beat whoever they want over the head, and it's usually the dissenting opposition of the establishment. They don't understand the repercussions of giving government power and authority, and that's really the tale to be learned throughout history, because liberty and limited government is truly a new idea that never has been fully tried. This ongoing discussion on hate speech is one that will be used to implement mind control through speech control, and in the not so distant future we'll have thought control, because our own private thoughts and beliefs will not be our own. The left needs to learn that hate speech is entirely subjective, and it's based in totally irrational, over-emotional reactions. It's yet another victimless crime that sheep-like Americans beg to get saved from, while they're ignorantly setting themselves up for mental tyranny. It's similar to the war on drugs, which killed privacy and the freedom to be left alone. Now it's time for the elites to engineer a scenario where they can get the masses to attack and kill their own freedom of thought and expression, to attack the liberty to discuss controversial subjects, and kill the freedom to express their consciousness within their own minds.